All right, today we have chapter 6, section 5. This is Alexander the Great and the spread of Greek culture. So we have a bust here of King Philip of Macedonia. That's Alexander the Great's dad. And then a coin with Alexander's likeness on it. And on the flip side of the coin is Zeus and his eagle. Alexander built his empire. King Philip of Macedonia had not wasted the money he spent on Greek tutors for his son. Young Alexander was a fine student and an eager one. The boy wanted to learn as much as he could, especially about the ideas and deeds of the Greeks. The kingdom of Macedonia lay just north of Greece. Alexander thought of himself as Greek, and he spoke the Greek language. But people who lived in the south in cities like Athens and Sparta, they didn't accept the Macedonians as Greeks. They thought that the Macedonians were barbarians, wild, uncivilized people. Alexander's tutor was the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Imagine that for a teacher. Aristotle taught the boy Greek that the Greeks were far better than other people, and therefore they deserved to rule. And remember, at this time, the Persian Empire is ruling most of the ancient world. So he's kind of telling him that the Greeks would make better rulers. Alexander loved his tutor, but his real role model was Achilles, the maybe true or maybe fictional warrior from the Iliad. One day, Alexander vowed he would visit the site of Troy and lay a wreath on the tomb of his hero. Before King Philip seized power in 359 BCE, Macedonia was poor and divided. Philip united Macedonia and built an army even stronger than Sparta's. With such an army and a talent for waging war, Philip captured one Greek city-state after another. Because at this point they were divided, they weren't united in any way, and they were weak because of that. So he just picked them off one at a time and conquered them. By 338 BCE, Philip had controlled all of Greece. No one had ever done this before. Remember, they were ruled by city-states. They each ruled themselves. Alexander then comes to the throne. Philip then planned to attack Persia because all he has to do is beat Persia and he can rule the whole ancient world in his eyes. So it seems like a plan for him, but he never did carry out that plan. In 336 BCE, he was assassinated or murdered by a political rival. At 20 years old, Alexander became king. This was his chance to show that he was just as great as his hero, Achilles. But what did Achilles ever really do other than fight in a war that he did die in? So Alexander the Great, one of Alexander's first actions was to invade Persia like his dad had wanted to do. Alexander the Great managed to conquer Persia within 11 years. So similarly to his dad attacking one city-state at a time, Alexander picks off piece by piece at the Persian Empire until he's conquered the whole thing, even up to the Indus River Valley. And Egypt, he earned the right to be called Alexander the Great. So this kind of takes you through his trip. Starts in Macedonia, conquers, remember there are Greek city-states in Asia Minor, conquers them, works his way through Asia Minor, down through Phoenicia, down through Israel, over across the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and then back up through, kind of circles around, through Mesopotamia, through sets up his palace in Babylon, and then through Media and Persepolis being the capital of the Persian Empire, and then back through the Caucasus Mountains here and up to the Indus River Valley. Alexander's energy and military genius helped him succeed. He drove himself and his armies hard, advancing across vast lands at lightning speed. His soldiers constantly grumbled, but they obeyed him. Wherever Alexander went, he established new cities. Many of them he named after himself. Even today, there are a lot of cities in the world named Alexandria or Alexandropolis. Alexander never stayed very long in any of these cities. He quickly pushed on and he never lost one battle. At last, not far beyond the Indus River, his weary troops refused to go another step. Alexander was angry, but he turned back. Alexander got as far as Babylon, where his palace was located, and came down with a fever. In 323 BCE, only 13 years after being crowned king, Alexander died. Like the legendary warrior Achilles, he died young, but he'd gone far beyond the deeds of Achilles. He conquered practically all of the known world. We just really have like the Ganges River Valley and the southern India and China for civilizations that are left that weren't conquered by him. Here's a little timeline of Alexander's time. So his dad, Philip, was ruling from 359 to 336 BCE. He conquers Greece in 338 BCE. Alexander then rules from 336 to 323 BCE. Alexander dies in 323, obviously. At that point, nobody really wanted to rule all of the ancient world. So that was a big job. So the kingdom is split into 3 smaller kingdoms. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. In 307, the Library of Alexandria is built in Egypt. And in 280, the lighthouse at Alexandria is built in Egypt. And this is all part of a huge time period called the Hellenistic Age. We'll talk about that more in a second. But from 323 to 146 BCE is the Hellenistic Age, where people are practicing Greek culture throughout the ancient world. In 212, Archimedes dies. We'll talk about him shortly. And then in 146, Greece is conquered by the Romans and becomes part of the Republic. And when we get to Rome, we'll talk more about that. But first, Alexander dies, and it doesn't stop the spread of Greek culture. So Alexander's death did spell death for the empire. Within 50 years, the empire had broken into 3 main kingdoms. So we have Egypt, we have Mesopotamia and East, and then we have the Greek and Asia Minor. Greek city-states, kind of, they're now united, but they're ruled by one king. So you'd think that would be the end of his plans, but remember, his plan was to spread Greek culture, and that actually continues after his death. So each of these 3 kingdoms was ruled by a family descended from one of Alexander's commanders. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Although the empire broke apart, Greek culture remained alive and, well, throughout the ancient world. So these are the Hellenistic kingdoms. When Alexander took control of lands, he tried not to destroy the cultures of the defeated people. Instead, he hoped in his new cities, the local cultures would mix with Greek. Unfortunately, this didn't happen in the 3 Hellenistic kingdoms as they came to be called. Hellenistic comes from the Greek word Hellas, which means land. The word Hellenistic is a synonym for Greek culture. We use the word Hellenistic to describe the 3 kingdoms centered around Greek culture after Alexander the Great's death. The cities of the Hellenistic world were modeled after Greek cities. Greek kings ruled them or were in charge of them. Greeks held the most important jobs. There were Greek temples, and there were Greek agoras, and citizens gathered at large Greek theaters for performances of Greek tragedies and Greek comedies. The Greek language was spoken in the city, but in the countryside, people still spoke their local languages. And here's an example of this, a Greek theater in Babylon. Why? Because of Alexander's influence, I guess. So we really see this take hold in Egypt. Egypt really looks like they're practicing Greek culture at this time and for the next 300 years. The greatest of all Hellenistic cities was Alexandria, the city in Egypt. Alexander had founded the city in 332 BCE at the edge of the Nile Delta. Alexandria became the capital of Egypt. Over the years, it grew famous as a center for business and trade. Its double harbor was dominated by a huge lighthouse that rose about 400 feet in the air. The tower was topped by a flame that guided ships safely into port.
Please excuse the interruption. Springport sports fixtures will take place this afternoon in the gym. Please meet your coaches in the PAC lobby after school. Thank you.
Excellent. So the lighthouse was topped by a flame that guided ships safely into port. The important Hellenistic cities were centers of learning. This is like where people would go if they wanted to go to college to learn to be a surgeon or a doctor or a theologian, or there were just many, many different types of universities happening here. And so, but Alexandria was greater than any of the other important places, apparently, greater than any of the rest. It boasted the largest library in the world. So if you're going to do research, it's kind of the place to be. With 500,000 book rolls. Alexandria was the learning capital of the Greek world. Scholars and writers from all over came to use the library. And there is a reimagining of Pharos Lighthouse. We don't have any pictures of it, obviously. Nobody painted it back then, but using some descriptions, we can kind of determine what it may have looked like. It was one of the original 7 wonders of the world. All right, but what some of the most important parts of ancient of Egypt kind of becoming more along this line? Sorry, I'd like to come back on. Okay, is that math and science really flourished in Alexandria. Around 300 BCE, a mathematician named Euclid developed a branch of mathematics called geometry. He started with accepted mathematical laws. We know this is this, right? But he wrote it down. This is this, and here's why. We'll talk about what those things are in a minute. Then he wrote carefully thought out step-by-step proofs of mathematical principles. The proofs helped explain qualities of such things like, what's a square? A square is a square because it's equilateral and has 4 right angles, right? When we have to learn those things in geometry class, in math, those are because Euclid wrote them down. This is an acute angle, and here's why. This is what makes an isosceles triangle isosceles. Mathematicians obviously still use Euclid's system today because it's what we learn. Have you ever heard that people of Christopher Columbus's time thought the earth was flat? No. It's not accurate. The ancient Babylonian astronomers knew that the earth was a sphere. In Hellenistic times, many scientists also knew that the earth was round. A scientist named Eratosthenes even calculated the distance around the earth. His answer, 24,662 miles, it's pretty close. Probably the greatest scientist, though, of the Hellenistic period was Archimedes. Archimedes was a scientist who discovered that people can use pulleys and levers to lift very heavy objects. So less effort, more work being accomplished. Great. One story says that he hoisted up a ship loaded with these devices. Once he even boasted, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand on, I'll move the world. Here are some examples of the different pulleys and the lever with the fulcrum that can be moved to make less effort, more effort, depending on how heavy the load is. And it says ancient people had used levers and pulleys for centuries, actually, but Archimedes found new ways to use them and new ways to improve them. He invented the compound pulley, a combination of the fixed pulley and the movable pulley shown here. Also, a certain discovery in astronomy, the Earth and the Sun. One scientist of the 200s BCE rejected the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe. Aristarchus of Samos believed that the sun was the center and the Earth revolves around it. His idea didn't catch on. Astronomers continued to base their work on Earth-centered universe until the 1500s ACE. It took them a long time to figure out that that was wrong. All right, it's time to take notes.